months. Now, some of you, there are a lot of new people here today. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves briefly. We've got only got half an hour. What their roles are, and just a little bit of the background history of perhaps how long they've been with how long they were in the position. So, Richard, you don't need to explain that you're between jobs. You've actually been out of work for a couple of months. Yeah. But I'll do that first.
We've got a position for you if you want.
I think he's had plenty of offers. So, please.
Good morning, everyone. Ooh, that is very loud. My name is Ross. I am the principal at Cooloola Christian College. Just over 12 months officially in the role, and 6 months before that acting. And my deputy is here with me as well, and Todd is in his role as deputy filling you as well. And yeah, it's been a bit of a journey for us, unexpected sort of stepping into the role of principal. Our school is only small, just under 500 students from prep to year 12 in a regional area with reasonably low socio-economic sort of demographic as well.
And you've been in that school for?
Been there a long time, since 2003, started teaching in industrial, outdoor education, head of primary, deputy principal.
Thanks. Richard?
I think I said it last night, Craig. Been at Toowoomba since 1988 and was hoping for a nice quiet final year.
And we'll hear more about that.
I'm Lynn Morrison. I am currently principal of Waltisbuhl Christian College, and I started in January. Prior to that, I came from, I had 4 years down in Bairnsdale, East Gippsland, Victoria, all through the 2 years of COVID and that sort of journey. And prior to that, I was 27 years in Mackay and got totally spoiled by the main facilitator. So all my flaws are his fault.
It's true. And they are not many.
So Gulf is about 110 to 12 students, and it's 68% Indigenous, so majority Indigenous school. We are remote, and I probably couldn't have done the biggest move ever between the sort of lowest point of the mainland of Australia and to almost the highest point, all in a matter of months. So it's been a significant journey.
Cherylynne?
I'll steal that. We talk about relocation. God called me from WA to Brisbane, Perth to Brisbane. Couldn't call me further from my family than that. And I came in 2017 as Deputy Principal at Calvary Christian College. For the last 3 years I've had the privilege of leading as Principal, and my wonderful team, who are the reason I'm still standing, are here with me today. The thing about when God calls you and you answer in obedience is that He has prepared the way before you. And perhaps the most significant part of my little story is that my family have relocated to the east as well. And so God has poured blessing upon blessing, despite the challenges of the last 3 years.
So, Richard, I wonder if you start us off. The last 12 months, Richard, just a paragraph or two, let people know the story of the last 12 months.
Well, obviously, COVID was major for all of us down in our context. At the end of last year, when the government made a decision for requirements upon both teaching and non-teaching staff within your school and within my school, that certainly was unexpected. I had not planned for it. Was hoping that it would never come, but when it did come, that affected us quite significantly. We got a staff of 100, and at that stage about 23 to 25% were non-vaxxed. So the last week of school, with the announcement, we had to make some decisions pretty quick about what were we going to do in the circumstances that we faced. That 23 to 25 people that were considering came down to 14 finally that decided that they could not continue their employment at TCC. So that really put some pressure upon us over the December, January. If I could just throw in here, Craig, I learned many years ago through a mistake that I had made that I had finished a year almost spent. I had nothing left in the tank, and suddenly there was a crisis I needed to solve, and I just did not handle it well. So the strategy that I have taken now towards the end of any term, towards the end of any year, is make sure I've got stuff in reserve. Because you never know when you're going to be held in a holding pattern, to use a flying analogy. And that stood me in good stead. So even though I was planning to finish on a certain date, I knew that I still had reserve if needed. And we all like our holidays, we need our holidays, but I just encourage you to make sure that you'll put a finishing line a little further ahead to make sure you've got energy if you need it. You are the leader of the school, you are called upon at times to carry a weight while everyone else is not around. So my encouragement to you, learning from my mistake, leave sufficient in the tank to get you through a crisis.
Just keep going, Richard, because there's more to that story.
So in the midst of the COVID, we had what every school would dread to have happen. We had a fatality on site from a workplace health and safety accident. That happened on the 7th of January. And I was at school on the day, a number of the senior staff were at school, and one of our ground staff died tragically from an accident. He had the accident, he actually passed away in March. So we had this on top of the pressure amongst the staff, because as you would know, the staff were pretty divided over vaccination. There was some intolerance towards various people, depending on which side of the line they were, and then suddenly on top of that, we have the tragedy of a 20 years staff member passing away, and his wife was a teacher who had decided not to continue because of vaccination. So it had a range of ramifications. Is that what you're after?
Yes, but also I think contextualise that with a long-term committed school principal having named the date that he's going to walk away, having to manage and deal with all of that right up to a year. And I think that's worth just contextualising that way, Richard.
Yeah, so on top of that, the staff had to handle the fact that the principal was leaving.
Yeah.
The announced date was the end of term 1. So you've got all this turmoil, this unsettledness in the school. And it was a challenge.
Ross, tell us about your last 12 months. Because you have a fascinating story as well.
Yeah, I guess some similarities with Richard in terms of vaccinations, and we've all been through that. We had very high numbers as well who were reluctant to meet the requirements of the mandate. It was challenging because I hadn't had a lot to do with working through employment contracts and arrangements like that. So great thing was we had good legal advice. ISQ gave some really good advice as well, and working closely with my board was really, really important. And then our board had the foresight to employ a HR officer last year for the first time in our history as a school. So having that person on board made that whole thing a bit easier. And then we had floods as well, which many of you guys experienced, and then a few other challenges along the way. So being a new principal with very little experience, I really did need to draw on the experience of some of the people in this room and other people who have been good mentors to me, and particularly the team, my leadership team and my board chair. So very humbly working with people trying to navigate an unforeseen and challenging 6 months in particular.
Yeah, and contextualise that in Ross's world, a fairly long-term staff member at Cooloola, which, if you don't know, is in Gympie, moving from not being the principal to being the principal, and the changing nature of the relationship that then brings with people with whom you've had long-term relationship in a different role and a different nature.
Yeah, and relationship, I think, is the challenge, because in a small community, you will worship in the same churches, in the shopping centre, and so trying to navigate that whole mandate with people and doing your best to maintain the relationship was interesting. And then the flip side of that, as Richard has indicated and others experience, okay, how do we then staff for the start of school? And so attracting staff and recruiting staff.
So it's all sounding very familiar,
yeah,
isn't it? So Cherylynne, just tell us about your last 12 months.
Wow. I think we all have very similar stories. I think for me, the knowledge, it's been a very faith-building time, and the knowledge that God has gone before has made all the difference. Towards the end of last year, I was watching the news internationally and nationally and expected the mandate to come. But prior to that, we were already dealing with two staff situations that were very complex. Both people left us at the end of the year, and those of you who've been through those types of situations or journeys will know that the confidentiality that lies around that type of situation makes it really difficult, because you know you're being judged, and you know you're being judged what you think is unfairly, and you still have to walk according to your true north and in integrity. That was really tough. And then I had two other big things happening in those 6 months. One of those things would be possibly or arguably one of the worst things that could cross a principal's desk. So I had the staff situation, those two things, and then the mandate hit as well. And over the summer break, and it wasn't much of a break, I remember thinking, the one thing that I've got from this is I feel so much stronger. I feel that with the team I have, and with the faith that I have, and with the support of the organisations that I'm networked with, I can kind of do anything. Please don't hear that as an arrogance. It's more as a, when the time comes and the need arises, I know where to go. And I think for each of us as Christian principals, the most important thing is to be very sure of your calling. God made that calling very clear, and I know He will make clear the day that I need to let it go. And I talk about holding our position in a kind of tight, loose way. It's loose in that when God decides it's done, it's done. But it's tight in that I have a confidence about what I'm doing. Excuse me. In the day-to-day, because of the way God has surrounded me and prepared me for this time and this place. And perhaps if I can add one little thing to that, one of the things our team did is from 2019, we have each year found a book, or let's say God has brought us a book that we've lived. And the book we chose to live this year is this one, Tempered Resilience by Bolsinger. If you haven't read it, I'd encourage you to read it. My big learning was that I used to think resilience was about bouncing back, having energy, being able to rest and recover quickly. And that's what we used to tell kids to some degree. But in this book, there's a deeper understanding of resilience that he's promoting. He talks about resilience as being very sure of your value system and your direction, so that you continue to follow your true north. And that's what I'm referring to when I say be sure of your calling and the timing of your calling. But he also says, in every situation, look at the feedback and look at what you can learn. So learn and grow from every challenge, because that is what resilience actually is. So that was a good wake up for me.
Thanks, Cheryl. Some real gold there. Some really... Cherylynne's a very experienced leader, relatively new in the principalship at that school, but a very experienced leader, and if you've not met her or any of these panellists yet, you ought to walk across the room and shake their hands, because the sort of networking that they're talking about that has helped them is available for you in this room, whatever level of leadership you currently feel. But Lynn, would you share, now, could you go a little bit further back than 12 months, just so that I don't have to, you can contextualise your own journey, mate.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So I have an extreme passion for rural and small remote area schools. I've always sort of felt that, you know, sorry guys, there are city people, but, you know, you can get people at a drop of a hat, but, you know, our regional kids, our rural kids, our remote kids miss out on the quality that gets contained in this space. So I felt a call to take up the principalship of a small Christian school in Victoria in 2019. Whole different world. I thought I knew education, I thought I understood Christian education, and then you get a Victorian government that is highly regulatory and very much in the sort of cancel culture, woke culture sort of approach to decisions that they're making. So that was a significant head shift that I had to do. 2019, I had an 11-year-old student who attempted suicide, and I'm having to minister and lead and take a community, a small community who know each other, who know circumstances, and take them through that journey of healing and protecting and keeping our students safe. From there we hit the catastrophic bushfires at the end of 2019. A number of my staff were impacted highly by those sorts of events. And we're just starting to get over it and COVID hits. 2.5 years or 2 years of COVID in Victoria, 269 days, locked down. In my personal world, where you're not allowed somebody at home, you're not allowed to go at more than 5Ks, there's the police that are out, they're questioning, they're checking, so we're doing that journey. At the same time, you're trying to take a small school that has got no investment in ICT into remote and flexible learning. You're then also going into rural contexts where there is no reliable Wi-Fi, and you're trying to constantly be making these decisions about how do we solve this, what's our next step, how do we support what's going on. From there, we had 7 remote and flexible lockdowns, the longest being 111 days, where students were not in school. And then you've got, and particularly in our context, a large portion of our students were on, NCCD basis. You're putting 4 kids in home who are all high needs, and you're expecting them to learn there and be there for 111 days doing that. So the journey then, I had to teach full-time in the classroom and be principal of a school in 2021, term 1. Couldn't get staffing. From there, we also had our cyclical review, new state, new circumstances, new directions, and at the same time, we were carrying a vision to build into high school. So we had to, I was in the process of adding year 7 and 8 to the school. By the time I got to July, I had been successful in all of those ventures, but I had burnt myself, basically, and so I gave notice and said I need to finish. My mum was up here the 269 days where I couldn't get home, couldn't connect with people who really knew me. But in that journey, there's a couple of things that I significantly learnt. The first one is, if you've ever seen the hurdle jumpers, you get so used to thinking that they're looking at the hurdle, but they're not. They're actually looking at the finish line. And keeping our focus on who God is in our context, because He's the same yesterday, today and tomorrow. He doesn't change. He's who we keep our eyes on. You know, he says, I am God and I do not change in Malachi. And you sort of go, that's what we need to do in those moments of crisis, those moments of significant disruption, displacement of our whole value systems. It's about keeping our eyes and our focus on the finish line, that purpose that God's called us to. The second thing is to love people. And I'm single, I'm on my own, I'm in these new environments.
2 dogs.
Yeah, I do have 2 fur babies. They don't answer me back. But, you know, I have this very strong independence about me. But in those situations, what I learned is the power of this community is just outstanding. At the end of the bushfires, we're a small school, 80 kids. We're 4 hours from Melbourne, but we might as well have been 2,500 kilometres in the Gulf, because Victoria only sees Melbourne as its place. And I reached out to the community of Christian schools, and I had some big schools that came along and did a journey of recovery with us, with our students, because I couldn't afford to bring in the counsellors, and I had, you know, my community around me was already stretched to the max. And it shouldn't take a crisis to do that for us, but it does. But love people, love without, and don't ever do it on your own.
So we've just got a few minutes, thanks. And listen, you want to hear the next part of that story, talk to Lynn, but there's a chapter 2 where the Queensland government wouldn't let her in. Now, Steve Dan's and I've got our theories as to why the Queensland government wouldn't let her in. She claims it's COVID, not so sure. Ends up in hotel quarantine in Cairns, and the woman, 1 floor down, 2 floors across, after 2 days of lockdown, sets her room on fire. So Lynn's got some really fascinating little stories about that trip as well. Ken, we've just got a few minutes left. Can I ask? You've all shared things you've learned, and that's the idea, okay? But we'll just go left to right this time and just say, hey, just a couple of sentences. What are some key learnings from the last 12 months?
When I visited McClay Christian College many years ago, Craig introduced us to, I think you had 15 immutable principles for the college. And I think 14 was that God has provided in advance all that this college needs. And for me, that resonated in the last season. God has already, worked it all out, and we need to trust Him. So when my anxiety levels were rising, it was good to be reminded of that principle that God's got this. He's already provided all that you need, and I needed to just be available to, I guess, enact that. And the other one would be, sometimes we want to react, but we need to respond. So just pausing, breathing, part that we got yesterday, pause and take time to respond. With, even if you have to write out all the risks of acting this way or not acting that way, and really respond with, I would say, spiritual discernment, rather than react to the situation.
Right.
I decided that I would be available for any of the staff members that wanted to talk to me in relation to their decisions, because obviously decision of employment is a massive decision that someone's making, and wanting to know exactly where I stood. So one of the clear ideas that I came up with is I would make a clear statement, a single sentence, that would make it clear to everybody where the school stood in relation to the start of the next year. And it's simply this: the school will have teachers in front of classes day 1 of 2022. That's my goal. I've got to have teachers in the front of the students. And that made it easy made it clear for those that were now ambivalent. What was the school going to do? I need a teacher. Are you going to be the teacher or not going to be the teacher? I'm going to have a teacher. So I think it made the decision making for them quite easy. But on this flip side of that, we've heard about it's really important to love. and I think to be just with people. But the time for you to call upon their good response back here is that you've already invested into their life, that you've actually shown love before the event. Because each one of our staff has a bank account.
Yeah.
And the time that we need to draw upon that is in times of crisis. But it's actually what's already in there. So the way that we treat people day by day, the way that we care for people, our staff, day by day, the way that we are just day by day, actually lifts the level of the bank account that you're going to have to call upon at some time. So my encouragement to you is treat everyone the way that you like to be treated every day. I think that's scripture too.
Yeah.
Do unto others as you'd have to do unto you. So I think I'm grateful to the Lord for seeing us through a very challenging time. And I think some of the keys there are clearing the message and also to make sure that I've invested into their bank accounts. Because they're worthy of it. Not because I want a return, but that is when you find out what's actually in the bank.
Wow. Thanks, Richard. Ben?
Probably the key is do it together. Really take that opportunity to see the needs that are there in front of you, but also your own needs. Because sometimes as leaders we can actually forget about, the fact that we're in the midst of this, and making sure that you find what it is that will fill your tank, that will take you to that next level, that will hold you in that position that God has purposed and equipped you to do for such a time as whatever is going on for you and your community. But make sure that you're keeping that connection. But I think for me it's strongly about seeing each other as groups, uplifting each other in prayer, going and doing visits with one another. That's a little bit more difficult for people like me. I can't get out very easily. But, it's at some point, the vision is that I'll be able to invest all that has been invested into me, what I've learned through this journey, into other schools. And that's probably the key for me, is stay connected, keep it going.
I guess when we value servant leadership as we do and giving of ourselves, for me the big wake-up call was put your own oxygen mask on first. And that was big. Just accepting that I needed to do that. And when you're working with a heightened community, listen more and say less. They just want to be heard. And the last one, can't remember. So I guess it doesn't matter so much. I think
there's a gem there for you to discover by having a conversation, because by morning tea it will have dropped.
It can.
There you go.
A lot of the decisions, perhaps the most important decisions that you're going to make, are going to be unpopular. Just make them. Do the right thing for the right reasons, no matter what the cost.
Fantastic. Can we thank our